Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. It is May 28th. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with a little bit of a redo of what we had on Friday. If you watched on Friday, you probably didn't hear our guest, but we have them back on today to discuss the topics that we went over on Friday. Then we're going to get into a possible path for the ACC to kind of fix all the problems that they've been dealing with. Utah might be interested in making their way over to the ACC before they've even joined the Big 12. Then we'll get into the most important coach for every contender in the country, the big-time contenders at the very least. And then we'll finish it off with a Top 10 Tuesday and go into the teams that I think have the most pressure going into this upcoming year. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a fun kind of interactive experience here, and that's always good for both of us. But let's jump right in, and we have our two guests here. We have Andrew Tate from the Andrew Tate Show around here, and Samantha Genzer from the Hoop and Heels podcast on the GSMC network. Welcome, both of you. Apologies for having to do this one more time, but excited to have you both back on.
Excellent. Thank you for having us. Hopefully it goes a little smoother than the last time.
That's always the hope.
Hmm.
But let's jump right in here and let's talk about the House versus NCAA case. Obviously, this is something that I've talked about a ton. I know, Tate, you've talked about this on your show. I'm sure, Samantha, you are slowly getting into this as it's starting to impact everything around college sports. But I'm curious, I guess we'll start with you, Tate. I'm curious, as you kind of looked into this and have kind of really unpack this more. I've seen a ton of people across, Twitter and different social media apps saying this is essentially the death of college sports as we know it. And I'm curious, do you have that same perspective? Or are you a little bit more tame in your takes as I am? Kind of, I think there's a path forward, and this is kind of a necessary step in that path, is kind of where I'm standing. But I'm curious where you are.
I do not see it that way. I see it the opposite. I see it as kind of like the world where the universities stopped taking advantage of a lot of players and hiding behind amateurism. There's a lot of players in the world, and that is male, female, but especially in the big sports of college football and college basketball, where universities have made a lot of money off of these players, and the players have been with having absolutely no power to do anything about it. The university have made a lot of money, and there's a lot of players that have not made money. I actually think this is a kind of like a new world order of college sports. I think it's going to show improvement in college sports and professional sports as a whole because of the fact that now players are going to be able to get paid. They're going to make money off their name, image, and likeness. And I can't count how many players that were not ready for the NFL, not ready for the NBA, but turned pro because of the fact that, hey, I don't come from money. Even a little money would be better than none. Now these players can say, you know what? I'm making money while at the University of Georgia or University of Michigan or at TCU or SMU. And I don't need to turn pro right away. I can get better. I can hone my skills in. I can work further toward becoming a better player. I can work at becoming a better student and maybe graduate instead of just jumping to the pros. So I think as a whole, the play on college football is going to improve. The players that are going into the NFL draft are going to improve. I think it helps March Madness because now players are 2, 3, 4 years into it, and you now know who these players are. So it improves them. It helps women's sports as a whole. That's kind of the way I see it. Didn't mean to go too long on that one. I apologize, but that's my
No,
take.
absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people were wanting to see from NIL, and we got to see it a little bit with some kids deciding to come back instead of going pro. But usually, those are the kids kind of on the fence, right? Those are the kids kind of maybe third or fourth or fifth round of the NFL draft, or maybe a draft pick in the NBA draft, but maybe not. But I think more and more we'll see kids that maybe would be third round draft picks come back because they want to be a first rounder or something like that. So the way I always saw it was the second the first media deal was signed in college football, at some point these players were going to come for their money, and they absolutely should. And I think it's something that is a step that had to be taken, is the best way that I can kind of describe it. But I'm curious from your perspective, Samantha. We kind of obviously we've unpacked college football a ton on here, but this is obviously going to impact other sports probably more than it's going to impact college football, just from a player to player perspective. So I'm curious, as you've kind of gotten into this, what's your perspective on how much this will affect smaller sports, women's sports, all of the stuff in between, instead of just, worrying about college football as a lot of people do right around now?
Yeah, no, so I actually did cover how this will impact women's sports on my Friday episode. And it's really just the lot of the non-revenue sports, which are sports that just make significantly less money, could be eliminated. And most of the time, those are women's sports and the smaller sports in general. These sports could literally be removed from the college, and if they stay, they will probably see significant budget cuts, which really alarms me. I really see women's sports facing financial issues under the new revenue sharing model. Fewer scholarships could be available for female athletes, and I mean, we all know that that would limit so many opportunities for young women to pursue higher education alongside sports. I mean, a lot of the time you have people who go to college and they play a sport where they have a purpose, and sometimes people have a purpose of playing a sport so they can go to college, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Women have worked very hard for many years to get the
Mhm.
recognition they deserve in the world of sports, and the risk of cutting certain women's sports is really alarming to me. A lot of athletes start at the collegiate level where they really make their name known, and then they move to the Olympics and the professional leagues. And by just removing some sports from the collegiate level, there are less opportunities for women to enter the Olympics and the professional leagues. And it is a bit scary, but of course, I am happy to see that players are getting paid for their contributions.
Yeah, I
Now,
think
I was
that's
just
the.
gonna,
Yeah, go
oh,
go
sorry,
ahead, please.
I was just gonna comment and say, because your concern is I have the exact same concern.
Hmm.
The big one is Title IX.
Right.
I think as long as Congress and the politicians get behind supporting Title IX and making sure that, hey, if you're going to cut sports, it has to be even,
Hmm.
and protect the women's sports as well as the men's sports, then there's a safety valve there. But uh, you know, I'm just a big proponent on men and women that they get at least a piece of the share. Because some of these schools are making huge dollars. Not all of them. A lot of them are losing money. But I think if you make it fair and balanced, and but I do think players should be allowed to make some money. So,
And I think the interesting thing about this is you might have the ability to split it evenly because NIL and collectives and things of that nature don't seem to be going away, right? It seems like those are going to stay around in these sports. So you still have the ability to have the football players be making more than the volleyball players, but you also have the ability to split these resources and the scholarships and everything evenly. And I'm curious, from your point of view, Tate, we talked about this yesterday, how this is impacting smaller schools. We always focused on the Power Five, and I'm sure that was the majority of the conversation in that room when they were deciding all this. So I'm curious, from your point of view, how do you kind of see this impacting smaller schools? I know the percentage for the smaller schools is only larger than it is for the Power Five, and it feels like a lot of energy is being put forth to protect the Power Five instead of make this kind of an equitable transfer into this new era, I suppose.
okay. This I feel like this settlement is going to kind of speed up the process of them kind of splitting off from each other. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but when I think about college football, I feel like there should be a whole different playoff system for the smaller colleges, the smaller Division One or Group of Five. Um, I would love to see that. That's what I loved about the college football super league, where you could have a totally different system for the group of five, where they have a playoff system and things like that, but also build in a system where the top group of five teams have a division that they can go to move up and compete and make a college football playoff as well. Because then they could make money in the group of five playoff system, but teams that are doing really well has the ability to move up and play and compete for a national championship as well. I like that because I think everyone should have that opportunity. Um, I worry because a lot of the group of five teams, they don't make that same money, and they're going to be at a major disadvantage. Not only do I see the group of five teams, but some of the smaller leagues or it's kind of weird to call the Big 12 a smaller league or the ACC a smaller league. But when you're looking at the money that the Big 10 and the SEC makes, I worry about the group of five and the Big 12 and ACC becoming kind of like a minor league because of the fact that teams like Georgia and Michigan and Alabama can go and start taking players from those teams that don't make the same amount of money. There's some things that need to be done, and I worry about the smaller teams, but also some of the mid-major teams as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've talked about this a little bit. I'm definitely in favor of the group of five and smaller schools breaking off because at the end of the day, you're not really playing the same sport at this point, right? You're playing two totally different sports. You're playing with two totally different abilities with the amount of financial help that some of these other schools get. I mean, you see the gap between even the Big 12 and the ACC teams to the SEC and the Big 10. Imagine the gap between the group of five teams to the big boys. So it's a huge problem, and obviously there's tons of questions with this and not as many answers as we would like, but I think this is a step kind of getting towards at least answers on all of this. But we'll unpack that, I'm sure, more and more on all of our shows in the future. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the ACC. They are still battling Florida State and Clemson. It looks like North Carolina might get on the party, and Utah is a very interesting thing to add to this. So we'll unpack all of that right after this, so stick with us.